Hassan in Kensington. The mayor says we need a ceasefire. Do you agree with him? Good morning.
Yeah, look, I agree with him. I think, frankly, he's been very late to call out this ceasefire. I think nearly 76% of the British public want a ceasefire
How do you get that figure, sir?
This is a YouGov poll. 58% want it immediately, and 18% want it as soon as possible.
Okay.
Only 8%. Yep. Okay. Number one. Number two, I think there is an open revolt amongst Labour progressive voters. They have been pushing Starmer for a ceasefire. Nearly 23 councillors have resigned. Of those councillors, 10 are not Muslims. There are actually progressive people who believe that the death toll in Palestine is too high. We have the health authorities there have released names and ID card numbers of 7,000 people who have died. That is 5 times the level of casualties that Israel has suffered. It's time people stop dying.
Okay, so let me ask you, why do you suppose Sir Keir Starmer is coming up short and won't say the word ceasefire?
Because he has locked himself into a position which is identical to what the UK government is doing, which is identical to what the Americans are doing. We are seeing a repeat of the Iraq invasion, where our sort of spineless prime minister basically agrees to march lockstep with the US government into a completely unnecessary adventure in the Middle East. That's why Starmer is helpless.
And when you hear the Israeli government spokesperson say all that would do would be to give Hamas time and the facility to regroup, to build more weapons, possibly to plot or plan more attacks, which is what the Israelis are saying, how do you respond?
I think it is nonsense. We should ask them how many of the 7,000 are Hamas. Right? Has anybody asked them?
Has anybody asked what? Sorry.
How many of the 7,000 people dead in Gaza are Hamas fighters? Right. They claim they have deadly information and accuracy. Why don't you ask them how many are there? 2,400 children have died in Gaza. How many of them were Hamas?
Yes.
99% of the children...
I just have to put caveats. Those figures are, of course, supplied by the Hamas-run government. I'm not saying there haven't been casualties and fatalities. Of course there have. But I think we just have to take those numbers, being aware who's supplying them. But it is on a horrific scale, Hassan. I'm not saying otherwise. Thank you for that. Sara in Leicester. Sara, your view on a ceasefire and the intervention now by the London mayor.
Hi, good morning, Nigel. Hi.
No, it's Nick today, actually.
I'm not normally sort of political, and I don't really like to get too involved in politics.
Yeah.
But I think I had to speak about this issue because I work in a school and I've got a lot of young kids coming in questioning, why the Labour leader said what he did, why is, Rishi Sunak supporting war, not asking for a ceasefire. These kids are coming in with flags drawn on their hand because they've lost a lot of social media, so they've been seeing things that maybe they shouldn't see at this stage.
What age? So you're a teacher, Sara, is that what you said?
In secondary school, not an assistant teacher, in secondary school.
Secondary school children. Okay, and what do you say to them when they make these comments?
I mean, obviously the school has had to issue a letter out to say that, we can't discuss politics, which is, rightly, the kids shouldn't be getting involved in that. But I think, even though, the school tries to implement these policies, but these kids are seeing horrific things on Instagram. TikTok seems to be the new sort of social media that kids go to. Yeah. I think the politicians are really outdated in terms of not keeping in touch with what the younger generation
what should they be
is thinking.
Saying?
I think, obviously what's happened is horrific, in what happened in Israel, what happened to the Palestinian kids now, in terms of the bombing and things. I think we should have stayed neutral, to be honest. I think because we're setting an example to these next sort of generation. And these are, some of them are from, they're not from just Asian backgrounds. They're from
neutral How can you stay neutral on a conflict of this magnitude, particularly noting the historical perspective that Britain has in this area? That's very tough. When asked an opinion, the Prime Minister says, I don't have an opinion on the fact that 1,400 people have been killed here and thousands have been killed. You can't have a British Prime Minister say that, can you, Sara?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that, in terms of neutral, what I mean is that not so aggressive. And, what Keir said about not allowing, food and things like that. I think these are quite extreme statements to make, for a leader. We should be thinking about humanity, where's the compassion in people's heart. The thing is, I'm just thinking about it from the kids' perspective, because these kids are going to grow up thinking this is okay to do.
But why aren't we also calling for the release of the hostages with the same vehement?
Yeah, but, how are you going to release the hostages with all the bombing? I think,
Well, hold on. Why can't the two go together?
It's not common sense.
Why doesn't a politician say, well, this is what's going to happen this afternoon, we'll stop the bombing and release the hostages? Why don't we hear that?
I think nobody's asking for stopping of the bombing, but I think there needs to be a more, rather than anger, because when I hear the Israeli side, there's a lot of anger, which is, rightly so. They should be angry. There's a lot of hostility in that region. But does the UK need to get that involved where they're issuing really harsh statements?
I've enjoyed our conversation, Sarah. Thanks for the work you do in our schools. Nick's in Ilford. Nick, your view on the ceasefire?
I think there should be a ceasefire. I don't think the Israelis will do it, but quite frankly, I'm surprised at the reaction of the internationally. When Gaddafi was going to lay waste to a city in Libya, we went in under humanitarian rights to make sure that he didn't do it. And I think we should probably do the same with Israel, to say no.
You don't mean send British military personnel in, do you?
Well, it wasn't just British. In Libya, it was British and French. I mean, it was under international law for the protection of civilians. I know it won't happen, but I think it's very hypocritical that it isn't really on the table. As far as Mayor Khan is concerned, I think this is a very cynical move. I think he's seen the backlash over the last few days, particularly with Muslim voters. And I think he's bolstering the Muslim vote in London, because without coming out, there's a good chance he wouldn't be the next mayor.
Lastly, a lot of people want a ceasefire. They're not Muslims. A lot of people want a ceasefire. They don't have any faith at all. It's not a exclusively Muslim viewpoint to want a ceasefire.
No, I absolutely agree. But he has got a Muslim base in London, and there is a big backlash at the moment within the country for Muslims.
Okay, all right. Nick, thank you. Have yourself a safe weekend. John in Seaford. John, ceasefire. How does it strike you, the idea? Good morning.
Good morning to you, Nick. There can be no ceasefire, Nick, for the simple reason we look back to the Second World War. For Germany and Italy, there was no ceasefire. There was an unconditional surrender. Millions had to die to rid the world of a tyranny. Japan, no ceasefire. The Americans dropped an atom bomb and a hydrogen bomb to prevent the deaths of hundreds of thousands of American, Allied, English, Australian soldiers. This is Israel's version of Second World War. Hamas is an organization that will destroy every Jew in the world if it has its chance. They must be destroyed like the tyranny of the German Nazi organization.
How will you prevent the next generation, so the children or possibly even the grandchildren of the terrorists that you're killing now, coming back in 20 years' time?
Well, listen to a man called Hassan Yousaf.
I'd rather listen to John Seaford.
He is a Palestinian. He has stated quite clearly that the Palestinians must rid themselves of Hamas, the proxy of Iran. Otherwise, Palestine will never be able to live in side by side with Israel.
And so the Israeli IDF is successful over the coming weeks or months. What happens then? What is the future for Gaza?
There has to be
a two-state solution.
There has to be talks between the two peoples to have some arrangement. Israel originally belonged to the Jews from Moses and Abraham into Canaan and Judea.
Right.
The Islamic people, who didn't exist until 610 approximately AD, several thousand years after the Jewish people were living in that part of the world. They have to come to an understanding.
Well, that would be marvellous. Obviously, it would be tremendous. It's one of those things, it's, of course, considerably easier said than done. John, thank you. Henry's in Boreham Wood. Can a ceasefire work?
I would suggest that a ceasefire wouldn't work in terms of what we're expecting to achieve by getting rid of Hamas. But that being said, I don't think stopping the aid and withholding fuel is such a sensible plan either, because if Hamas do have so much fuel already, what was the point in withholding it?
Some people would say that by applying this pressure is the only way you'll get leverage to try and get the hostages out. How would you respond to that?
I think that, I was originally calling because I think it's very unfair how a lot of the British public are choosing sides so, black or white. You have to be one or the other. And I find it very difficult. Sadiq Khan's message today, for example, did he call for the release of hostages as part of the ceasefire?
I haven't seen the whole tape, but to my knowledge, I don't think that's in there. But don't take that as gospel. I feel certain my colleague would have clipped that bit as well if it had been.
Correct. Which it's such a sort of a clear way of looking at the situation by saying, we are supporting that side of the conflict when it's such a complicated issue.
It certainly is. Henry, thank you. Let's get one more in before the news headlines. David in Hammersmith. David.
Hi, I'm just astonished by people's attitude on this. If somebody kidnapped your boys and they took them next door and started firing rockets at you and continue trying to kill you, you would give everything you've got to fight back, and you wouldn't have a ceasefire unless there was first you got your boys back, and then a third party perhaps was involved, somebody who perhaps has hated you for years. And I've seen the civilians, the so-called innocent civilians, spitting on kidnapped Jewish people in the back of trucks, one of whom was actually had a bullet into the head and was in her underwear. I mean, look, the Saudis have 3 million emergency tents, air-conditioned. They could take the whole of Palestine, of Gaza out temporarily. We can feed them. We can use the UN, and Gaza can be eradicated of tunnels and Hamas. This is all done by Iran, okay? And these people, they do not even realize that Iran has no time for them, for their version of Islam anyway.
David, thanks for that. We will continue the conversation, perhaps come back to other matters as well, but